Dr. Rachel Sharman is a senior lecturer and a researcher in psychology at the University of Sunshine Coast, specializing in a child and youth and development. Before that, Dr. Sharman worked for over 15 years in a variety of child-related fields. Wait, no, now I lost my page.
Read what's highlighted.
Huh?
Read what's highlighted.
Dr. Sharman's, I'm just restarting. Dr. Rachel Sharman is a senior lecturer and a researcher in psychology at the University Sunshine Coast, specializing in child and youth development. Before that, Dr. Sharman worked for 15 years in a variety of child-related fields, including child protection, youth justice, disability, and genetic research. Dr. Sharman's research is focused on healthy development of the child brain. She has published over 30 peer-reviewed reviewed journal articles. Gee, she must really know her stuff. Dr. Sharman is a weekly guest expert segment on ABC radio and appears regularly in a newspaper. Typo again. Newspapers, magazines, including Time and television, and including news, the project SBS Insight. Dr. Sharman has a history with Childhood Summit as the first MC. Today, kind of like me. Today, Sharman will share some wisdom from her latest book, Becoming Autistic, and how screens are reshaping children's brains. Please welcome Dr. Rachel Sharman. Man, my legs are killing me.
That one. Thank you. All right, strap yourselves in, people. I'm going to fit about 4 developmental lectures in 20 minutes, so you'll need to put your brains in. Half an hour, okay. Still a challenge. All right, so I'm here to talk to you today about some very, very new research, literally only in the last few years. You'll see that from the references that we have up here. What is going on? All right, now I've just been flying around Australia to speak to about 5,000 GPs about this particular issue, as well as child health nurses and various things. So this speech is a little bit academic, and I kind of assume most people know what autism is. But for those of you who don't, the 2 primary criteria is impairments or a deficit in socio-emotional communication, so language, understanding emotions, understanding other people, that simple, as well as a restricted and somewhat obsessive range of interests. Okay, so that's your 2 sort of main criteria. Obviously, it's on a spectrum. Usually it involves some level of intellectual impairment, but sometimes not. So all sorts of different ways that this particular condition can manifest. Now, what's interesting about it is look at those prevalence rates. Less than 1 in 1,000 in the 1960s, 17 per 1,000 today, doubling between 2000 and 2020. This is weird. This does not happen or should not happen. It's very rare we see figures like that, certainly in biology and even less so in psychology. Interestingly, when we ask parents what's going on at home, you know, what are you doing with your screens, that kind of stuff. Look, we've all been there. I was trapped with a 3-year-old in the pandemic. I'm not going to lie, he spent far too much time on an iPad, and, you know, when the lockdowns lifted, we had to deal with the tantrums and we had to deal with all that. But we do definitely have a babyhood and a childhood that is much more characterised by, as some teachers call it, parenting by iPad. Okay, so the kids are stuck in front of these screens for a very, very long period of time. In fact, so long it's now even got a name, intensive early screen exposure, which refers to 4 hours of screen time or more per day for kiddies, okay? So this is what we're going to go through today. This is basically the summary of my talk. So effectively, we're seeing this intensive early screen exposure increasingly being related to autism or autistic-like symptoms, removal of those screens for a minimum of 3 months, and parental training appears to remediate that, so the symptoms go away. And we're going to have a look at some of the brain imaging results that look at how the brain is actually changing in response to that intensive early screen exposure. And finally, what we might be able to do about it. All right, here's some of the brief history behind this. So we started to get psychologists and paediatricians going, hey, I'm seeing a lot of kids who are on the TV all day, they're looking very autistic, I'm not sure what's going on here, this is odd, okay? We had a Romanian psychologist who's actually a clinical psychologist by trade. He's not really a researcher. I've actually spoken to him, not really his jam. But he was so concerned about this, he started to track these kids over a few years, so what we call a longitudinal study. And what he was able to do after a while was separate the sheep from the goats. So the first thing he'd do with a child or children who were diagnosed with autism was kick them off the screens, all of them. Total screen absence for 3 months. And then he would teach their parents, and this is what we've come to, teach their parents how to interact with their children. As one of our child speakers said, how about spending some time playing, interacting, bonding with your child? Trust me, your child is in charge of your nursing home, not your phone, so you might just want to consider that in 40 years' time. Surprise, surprise. Now, of course, some of those kids didn't improve or didn't very much improve, so there's your sort of genuine, if you like, cases of autism. But another group did, and in fact improved so much they were no longer qualifying for a diagnosis of autism, okay? So what he noticed specifically was that social facial expressions improved, so actually smiling at people, hello, how are you, that kind of thing. Attention and interest towards people. Have we all seen that horrifying thing we have now with babies in prams looking at a device? This is highly problematic. Babies need to be smiling at people and gooing and garring, and then people come up and go, oh my God, isn't he gorgeous? And this is really important. They need that to develop social, emotional, language skills. Okay, so this is not helping, and I'm going to get onto some really scary stuff in a minute, exactly why it's not helping. In 2019, the research was still pretty light on, but it was getting to a stage where some fairly sensible people were actually saying, hey, I think we've got a causal link here. So this is one of the first systematic reviews I've mentioned up there. A group writing in paediatrics looked at early life social and digital media experience with development of what they started to call autism-like symptoms in babies, 12 months of age. Very compelling study just recently out from Japan, actually tracked over 80,000 mother-child pairings, what we call dyads, okay? And they looked at them at age 1 and then just watched. Okay? They looked at a whole range of different things, got them at age 1, got a whole bunch of stuff about them, watched. 2 years later, so longitudinally tracking these kids, if those kids had 1 to 2 hours of screen time at age 1, their autism diagnosis doubled. If they had 3 to 4 hours or more, that tripled the diagnosis 2 years later. Okay, so this is happening. I always get asked this question, so I've just put this little study in here, the end one there. This was actually looking at people who really didn't have screen-induced or virtual autism, if you want to call it that, but the researchers looked at them anyway and looked at what happened when they introduced or removed screens, and indeed found similar sorts of patterns. So even if the person does have genuine biological, classical, if you want to call it that, autism, the screens are still exacerbating their symptoms anyway, which is quite interesting. So this is doing something. What's it doing? All right, a little bit of brain development 101. The human species is quite remarkable. We are born far too early. We are actually all born a big fat fetus. That's all we are. If you look at other mammal species, they pop out, they walk, they can immediately walk to their mother to drink milk, etc., etc. We are born way too early. Our brains are very underdeveloped. When we're born, we are 100% reliant on our caregiver. Now, fun fact, ladies, if we had babies at the same time as other mammalian species, they'd need to be about 1 by the time they were born, okay? And in fact, our pelvis can't take it. If we actually tried to give birth to a 1-year-old, apart from all the other horrifying things that might go wrong, it simply couldn't fit. So evolution has made a trade-off, okay? It's made a trade-off, so we effectively give birth to a fetus, but we're clever enough to care for it, okay? Get through that pelvis. Otherwise, we'd all be walking around, or sorry, crawling around on our hands and knees. We couldn't actually walk upright with the pelvis size that we would need to give birth to a typical mammalian baby. So what I've got there is a sort of a brain at birth with all the little synapses and neurons. Cool. By about 2 years of age, you've got more synapses than you'll ever have in your life. Okay, so at 2, you've got all this electrical wiring in here. It's just going mad. It's just going completely mad. It's responding to stimulus. It doesn't know what it's doing. Okay, explains the average 2-year-old, doesn't it? Then we do something really interesting. We learn by a process of brain death. And this really freaks people out. We actually start to lose connections that we don't need. Okay, so it's brain atrophy. So the connections that we need and that we use often get strengthened. Just think like a muscle, okay, gets strengthened. The connections that we don't need atrophy, die off, wither away. This is why we talk about critical periods in the brain. We have a period of time in early childhood to be able to get kids to learn certain things. If they don't, they'll miss it. And in fact, there's parts of the brain required to do that may well disappear. So we do have this really finite period. Anyone who doesn't believe me, there's a reason why, for example, we teach adolescents to drive, particularly manual cars, those of you who are older than me and old as me. At around 16, all of their motor control, all of their frontal, it's just primed. Anyone ever tried to see what happens when you try to teach a 25 or a 30-year-old how to drive? Don't ever drive with that person. And they'll never get it. They really won't. They'll be hopeless to the day they die. They can practice and do all of it. They'll never be able to pick it up. Those of you who are bilingual, same deal. Hey, you grow up with that language, immersed in it throughout your childhood, whatever. You speak both languages, cool. Once you're, probably about 12, 13, 14, funnily enough, when we start to teach language in this country, hilariously, the best you can do is map it onto your language of origin. Okay, so you're always going to have that kind of language of origin as a reference point, and you always have those accents and all that sort of stuff. Very difficult to pick up those 2 languages fluently. So the important thing is the human brain wires itself to the environment in which it finds itself. This is why we are such a successful species. We can survive at the North Pole, the equator, we're good, yeah? We wire ourselves to what we need to know. So this is just a nice little comment from the chief child psychiatry from America, just reminding people that if you're sitting around doing music, sports, academics, running around, they will be hardwired. If you're on that couch on screens, that's what's going to be hardwired. Okay, so you're potentially going to lose the capacity to build some skills if you don't get them at a certain age. Right. So what are our phones doing for us? Not good. So we actually are now looking at brain imaging research. This has gone just from looking at associations and correlations and all that sort of stuff to what's going on in these kids' heads. So we've got some emerging research looking at white matter, for example. Doesn't really matter if you know what that is. Who cares? It's part of the brain. You need it. It's good. It's not bad if it's bad if you don't have it. Surprise, surprise. Higher screen use showing changes in white matter. From the other side, we've also got people looking at nature exposure in particular, so running around in what we call open green spaces. So we already know that boys in particular who live in apartments show higher rates of ADHD and ASD and a whole range of things. And in fact, in Canada, they've gotten so clever, they've tracked exactly where you live in relation to a park, and they can map what your risk of developing some of these conditions are according to how close you live to a park. It's that simple. It's completely ridiculous. Why? Because running around in green space appears to be doing good stuff for your grey matter. Okay, so we've got a couple of different brain things going on here, which is cool. Zamfir's training, which is now being trialled, particularly in countries that are having difficulties with, emerging autism and very large numbers of kids with emerging autism, has been shown to actually alter EEG patterns in the brain. Okay, so this is not just behaviour. This is changing the brain, right? It's changing the brain and how it works. Importantly, if you're on that phone, if you're that little baby in the pram, right? Okay. What's one of the skills you're not doing? Now, I'm going to introduce you into this concept called theory of mind. Theory of mind at its simplest is when I arrive here, Ayanu might offer me a tea or a coffee. He doesn't know what I want, okay? Or I don't know, a bottle of scotch, whatever. But he doesn't. So he asks, okay, what would you like? He understands that because he feels like a Diet Coke doesn't mean that I might want an orange juice, okay? So he asks, he uses his word and he asks me. It's that simple. We should have all developed a decent theory of mind around the age of 3 or 4. Okay, so it's very difficult for you to remember back what it was like not to have one. It's simply understanding that people have a different mental representation to you. Okay, I know something or I see something, but you understand that you see that differently. I see things differently to you. I'm going to play you a clip because it does get a bit complicated, so hopefully this will help sort out what is theory of mind.
When you play hide and seek with your kiddo, have you ever noticed how they will cover their own eyes and think that makes them invisible? What about when you ask your child to pick out a gift for a parent or sibling, and they choose a toy that they'd like to receive themselves instead of something the other person would want? If your child is around the ages of 2 to 3, you may have noticed any or all of these behaviors. Believe it or not, all of this is expected developmentally. But why? Because these young kids do not yet have a firm theory of mind. Having a firm theory of mind means you understand that other people's thoughts and feelings are separate and different from your own. Early research about theory of mind suggests that kids develop this understanding around the ages of 4 or 5. But new research indicates that kids as young as 18 months can display a theory of mind through their nonverbal actions and communications. An 18-month-old isn't aware of this, of course, but the older they get, the more conscious their intentions will become. Older children might ask, either in their own heads or with another person, how will the teacher react when they find out what I just did? Or will my mom get mad at me for taking a cookie without asking first? The ability to imagine other people's actions and reactions based on past experience gets more sophisticated as we get older and more experienced in our relationships. What can we as parents do with this information? First, we can laugh. When we understand our kids' brains better, we can find more humor as opposed to frustration in their behaviors, even when those behaviors seem selfish or self-serving. We can judge them less too. But of course, we ultimately want them to become compassionate people. So, we can coach our kiddos through tough situations with empathy and help them consider how other people might react to the things they do. If your child has yet to develop a firm theory of mind, they will typically be unable to practice these behaviors consistently or independently until at least 4 or 5 years of age. Even older children need support in considering others' needs and feelings, but showing them these skills early will set your little ones up for future success. This video is...
Okay, so I'll take you back to the 2-year-olds. 2-year-olds who really lack a theory of mind, they honestly believe that everyone is of a hive mind. So I want you to put yourself in the 2-year-old's shoes here for a minute. Imagine they're thirsty. They think you know that. They really think you know that, okay? And then they're getting angry. And why are they not doing anything? Because I'm thirsty, okay? No, they can't speak properly yet. They're not actually expressing that. So they start to throw the tantrum, okay? And the parent's like, what do you want? I don't get it, okay? Theory of mind and that explosion is what pushes language development in humans, okay? So around about 2 to 3, kids go, oh, I need to ask for what I want. So instead of screaming, crying, carrying on like a pork chop, I actually need to start to develop some language skills. Now, theory of mind is one of the few functions in the human brain that actually continues to get better as we age, and it continues to get better and better and better. And it's why we often say that age brings wisdom. It actually does. As you have more and more social scenarios, more and more social situations, you're exposed to more and more different people, diverse, groups of people, you really start to understand that people think differently. When you read novels and books and you immerse yourself in those characters, you start to get an understanding of why this person does that, why this person thinks this way. It builds empathy. Now, it should surprise no one here, hopefully, after that sort of introduction, that the primary deficit or impairment in autism is theory of mind, okay? It's the number one deficit that underpins these issues. So we have the symptoms, which is poor social emotion communication, restricted interests. What's sitting under that is a deficit of theory of mind. Okay? And of course it is a spectrum, so some people will be particularly poor and some people will have some level of theory of mind, but just not what we would expect for that age range. Yeah? That is not what I want it to do, Yayane. I need it to go to the next clip. Sorry, thanks. I'm going to give you all a theory of mind test. You're all having a neuropsych test this afternoon, so look, it's only 3, you'll be fine. I'm actually going to show you... Okay. I'm going to show you this video clip. Love this clip. It's from a movie that some of you might recognise, and in it there are no words spoken whatsoever. There's 0 language in this clip. And I want you to see if you can sort of figure out what's going on here between this boy and the gentleman. Okay, so you have a think about what you think's going on and I'll tell you at the end.
Here's a file.
Okay, if you managed to figure out that the boy saw something that he wasn't quite sure about and he tried to get the attention of the adult male and the adult male realised the boy had seen something that he worried about, so he went over to see what it was, congratulations, your theory of mind is working just fine, okay, for the time being anyway. Imagine what it's like not to be able to interpret that basic information. I've actually had adults with autism say to me, when I walk into a room like this, everyone may as well be wearing a hockey mask. I have got no idea what people are thinking or feeling. They can sometimes run themselves into trouble telling a joke that they think's really funny, Unfortunately, other people around them do not and get very upset, yeah? Because they're not reading the facial expressions correctly. They're not getting the social situation, that how they're trying to interact or get attention is actually upsetting to some people, yeah? So they can run themselves into all sorts of very difficult social situations. This is actually one of the tests we use. It's called Reading Mind in the Eyes test. It's not a definitive test of autism, it's just one that we use alongside others. You've only got a pair of eyes there and you've got to figure out what the expression is, yeah? So, you know, people obviously do fairly well on the easy expressions, things like happiness, sadness, angry, whatever. But then we start to get to these more socially sophisticated expressions and it gets harder and harder. In case anyone's wondering, by the way, women are better than men at this. Theory of mind, full stop, as well as this test, okay? Why? Because we have babies. We have the baby that we need to figure out why this screaming mass of neurons is yelling at us. What is wrong with it? Okay? And in fact, pregnancy changes your brain. Another thing that changes your brain actually changes structures in the brain that help you figure out what that screaming mass of neurons wants. But likewise, older people often have better theory of mind too. So what I say to people is if your older female relative is kicking you under the table at Christmas when you're telling what you think is a really funny joke, shut up. She knows what she's talking about. You might not. All right, so yeah, my colleague and I wrote a book about this. We're actually going to be releasing a second edition fairly soon because we actually flicked forward to say what is going on with some teenagers. My colleague Mike Nagel's particularly interested in adolescence, and we are seeing these trends in adolescence right now, which are problematic. And we suspect it's got a lot to do with poorer theory of mind that is linked with social media. And it's not just us, there's plenty of neuropsychs around the world who are worried about this as well. So we've got all sorts of weird, wonderful things going on with teenagers. The last point there, the rise and rise of loneliness. An amazing fact, the United Kingdom has a minister for loneliness. It's now so problematic in the United States that they've devoted an entire government department. Because if you don't have good theory of mind and you don't have the capacity to engage with people, to be okay with the fact that people have different perspectives to yours, to be all right with the fact that you can have a difference of opinion, the world will still turn, I promise you, that's actually okay. You don't have to get into these big polarised debates all the time. You are going to end up pretty friendless at the end of your life if you can't manage that. Yeah, and there's a lot of people who are really struggling to manage that. We had a recent adolescent survey come out where the teenagers themselves acknowledged that they simply cannot tolerate a viewpoint of other people. We know why. Social media is an echo chamber. They're using algorithms. They're feeding your own opinion back to you all the time. You know, all the time. So the teenagers just aren't getting a range of other opinions, and when they do, they don't know what to do with it. It freaks them out. They either become quite anxious or quite aggressive. It's really interesting. Like, this is, for someone my generation, this is weird just to watch. Like, seriously, you're getting that upset about a political debate? What is wrong with you? Move on. Trust me, there are other things in life to get upset about. All right. Just to find, so this is something that I often talk to practitioners about, but just think about what the modern childhood is, and you've heard that today from some of the kiddies as well as yesterday. Interestingly, one of the questions we're getting asked is, okay, if these screens are causing these problems in the brain and changes, can they be remediated or reversed? The answer is we simply don't know. We honestly don't. However, Yalda Alls was a bit of a pioneer in this. She just took some teenagers out on an outdoor camp, kicked them off screens for 5 days, and what was interesting, noticed that there was a significant improvement in their non-verbal emotion cues. That's pretty basic stuff, okay, that's body language, but the teenagers actually got better at picking it up after 5 days. So there is some hope here that perhaps if there's some things being done by this overexposure to screens, that maybe we could undo it towards, with other sorts of activities. Final word in praise of play. So We used to think that play was very much just practice for adulthood. So, kiddies run around as doctors and nurses and firemen and all that and pretend to cook in a kitchen. Okay, that's cool. These little cubs here are actually practicing catching a gazelle or whatever it is they're going to eat as an adult, and they're practicing on each other. So that's cool. But what we're now seeing is more and more research, very compelling research, that it's absolutely vital for the development of empathy. So if you go and have a look at the kiddies in the playground, they will have to negotiate. What game do you want to play? What's going to happen with that game? What are the rules? How are we going to play it? Oh, I'm bored with that. What do we do now? Oh, he's in me. And they have a little argument. Then there has to be an apology. Think about all of the amazing social skills that are going on there. And again, if you don't have that, how are you going to sort of grow as a human? I want to leave you today with one fascinating bit of research that I particularly like: spiders. So they actually had some PhD students, I can't believe they did this, but anyway, analyse some spiders. And the female spiders who played more in their childhood were less likely to kill and eat their mate in adulthood. And I just thought I'd leave the men with that thought, and you can make that what you will. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you.